When Carl invited me to talk, he wanted me to touch on key performance indicators for practices and how I saw those shifting as we move to the future. As Carl said, my background has been, I was 18 years in private practice, but I've been in the industry for 34 years. The last half has been in working with private practices across the country, and so I'm very, very passionate about it. Now I'm going to start by telling you that I think audiology has a very, very bright future. Given the opportunity to enter into an industry again, I would choose this one, just because I think there are some exciting things that are going to happen in the very near future. But I'm also going to, in my comments today, be a little bit harsh on my colleagues in our industry, because historically they're very poor business people. And what we have to do is we really have to look at ways that we are going to create higher levels of efficiency. What I'm going to say echoes very much what Brian and Dr. Almani have talked about. I think we have to, as an industry, or as a profession, disassociate ourselves with product. And I think I'll give you some reason why we need to do that. I'm going to start with a disclaimer on these first set of slides. And that's because I stole them, and I didn't think the guy that I stole them from would be here tonight. But Dave Fabry's in the audience. Dave and I have talked to a lot of private practice folks together over the last year or so, and he put together some slides. And so we're starting out first, those who do not study history are damned to repeat it. So one of the things that we were very interested in looking at was, we're not the first profession that has had to deal with a baby boomer bubble coming through through our ranks. And so what's happened to some of the other professions that are out there? What's happened as the baby boomers have moved through? So we took a comparison of 3 doctorate professions here. We've got dentistry, optometry, and audiology. Now some of the data that's up here was actually, I think Dave Schmerger put it in the article back in 2006. In the journal, but some of the other than in the lighter blue colors in the middle and towards the bottom, Dave extracted from some current data, and I think it's really interesting to look at a comparison of the 3, particularly in the student investment, being $82,000 for dentistry, $108,000 for optometry, $90,000 for audiology, and then go down and take a look at the next to the last line where you see percentages in private practice, and what you see is 93% of the dentists are in private practice, 60% in optometry, 21% in audiology. Now, optometry has an asterisk, and that asterisk is that if you look at true optometrists who do nothing but have their own private practice, in other words, they aren't associated with any other company, there's only 10%. So the optometrists are have very few that are pure private practice. And then you can take a look at the mean annual income down below. So let's take a look at U.S. optometry. In 1980, 21,000 were in practice at that point in time. And in 1980, 90% of them were sole owners and partners in private practice. So, it was seen as a very professional-driven private practice organization or group or profession. Okay? Something happened during the 80s, and obviously there was an improvement in technology. Fashion became a part of vision. They had this thing called LASIK that landed on their doorstep. But the bottom line is there was an increased demand, prompted consolidation, and we saw a lot of big companies jump into this baby boomer in a very product-centric environment, right? So optometrists, it was all about glasses or contacts. And so what happened? Well, the number of optometrists grew, but the private practice portion dropped dramatically. Biggest part is the annual net income for the average optometrist dropped to $94,000. That up from in 2009. About 114 at a peak, 135, and now today it's at 94. So what we've seen the consolidation of that industry has had a dramatic effect on the profession of optometry. So over 30 years, population, you can see, substantially increased. The earning livelihood, 100% in private practice declined from 90 to 10. And at the end of this 30-year period, the average compensation, job satisfaction declined. And I think we can put it to the consolidation of wage employment. People are more satisfied owning and driving their own businesses, the entrepreneurial spirit. Let's look at the dentist profession. 156 active practicing dentists. 93% have their own business, drive their own business. Average earning, 192 to 305 per year. So what are the dentists doing? You know, what's happened? They've seen the baby boomers roll through too. I think that you've seen a number of factors. One, corporate consolidation just hasn't worked very well in dentistry. We've seen the Gentle Dentals and a number of the Bright Smiles, and they'll try to come up. They just don't seem to take hold in the communities. I think that dentists have stayed away from getting too engaged in the third party and being funded by insurance. Now they have an insurance component, but if you look at their insurance, it's really more preventative than it is for the cosmetic or the major procedures. For example, if I want a crown, half of it supposedly is covered by my insurance, but the other $600 has to come out of my pocket. And I think that that's kind of an interesting model. That's a big revenue generator for dentists. And I think it's interesting to look at that and divide this insurance piece in half, because so how could that apply to our industry? And then finally, the baby boomers, they have a demand for this cosmetics, and I think that's had a big boost. And I think we can see the same thing coming our direction with the connectivity that's taking place with product. And I think that there'll be more demand for people to come through the door to find out how we can couple some of these devices with their hearing. So dentistry is more independent. In fact, it says in comparison to physicians, dentists work more independently, have a higher rate of solo practices, and in some cases, their earnings have surpassed the net incomes of physician. And that is, and I put this slide in here, left it in, because it leads us to the physician side of the model, which is total insurance, right? And I think we see the limitations that has. And so as a profession, we have to look at our approach into these parts of the market. And I think we've made our point here, but this is looking at compensation for audiology. This is from American Academy. And you can take a look at 2005 versus 2011. And take a look at the owner. We've seen a sharp increase, and I think that is a tribute to our industry or our profession and where it's going. All right, so again, you have to look at history to understand where we're going. I think we have the opportunity to help drive and shape some of that. And as business owners, we look at the economics and we look at the KPIs of business. There's some key factors that go on. But I want to talk about sizing the market, because the question is how much of the market is the independent channel right now? I mean, how truly independent are we? And so some of my data, if you look at Carl's, it parallels, but I highlighted the number at the bottom, private. And this is compiled from internal data that we use to try to look at market penetration and how we're going to go into different marketplaces. But we think in the U.S. today, about 39% of the industry is truly independent. And that means they're not affiliated or have a contract, or they have the total ability to decide what they buy and when they're going to buy it. And you can see how the rest, 24% in public. We know about 21% of that's the VA. VA did this over 700,000 units in roughly 3 million unit industry this year. But here's the problem. The problem is that we're 39%. If you look at how we're growing, the data that these two gentlemen before me showed says that we are flat. We're selling the same amount of units as a private profession as we always have. In fact, maybe a few less. But meanwhile, big box is growing bigger. So any growth in the industry is being consumed by the big box groups. The internet is having an effect. That segment of the business is growing. So is managed care. Managed care and Infinity, those two combined, those are growing at a rate of somewhere between 15 and 20% annually, which is about 3 to 5 times larger than the industry is growing as a whole. So the bottom line is the private practice segment of our industry is losing market share. We may sell the same amount of hearing aids, but as the industry grows, we sell a smaller percentage of that market. And so I think that that's something that we have to start looking at and starting to understand, why are some of these other groups growing, and why are the units that flow through the profession of audiology stagnant? All right, so now let's talk about the KPIs, private practice future. I think it's really about efficiencies, and I really think it should be 2 E's up there. It should be efficiencies and it should be experience. Because I think the experience that we provide day in and day out in the private practice setting is really what is going to drive and grow the business or our profession as we move forward. So what I'm going to do is this is the last slide I have. I'm going to talk a little bit to these numbers, and not to put anybody to sleep. But I think that there's a couple of things that we have to take a look at as a group, when we look at efficiencies. And I think one of the measures that we have to have is this revenue per clinical hour. At the end of the day, I circled, well, is there one of these microphones drop? I don't want to get too loud. All right, so we have total revenue at the top, returned hearing aids, non-hearing aids. So we get total net revenue, you see that at 100%. In my opinion, as we move forward as an industry, that number really isn't the most important number. We should subtract out our cost of goods of hearing aids. Now, I know and I understand people are going to make decisions on buying hearing aids based on the total price, right? But at the end of the day, when you're looking at how profitable your business is, what matters is how much gross margin you have from the purchase of that hearing aid. So in the industry in the last few, back in the old days, it was very linear. We had the manufacturer here, we had the professional here, and then we had the consumer over here. The manufacturer was a B2B relationship. Everybody talked between the manufacturer and the provider or professional, and then the professional communicated to the consumer, and you had this B2C, and that you really didn't have a whole lot of relationship going on right here. But what has shifted today is this thing called the internet has allowed the consumer to begin to look at and see what's happening inside the manufacturing world. They can go in and check prices. They compare what's going on. They walk into our offices already making decisions on the products they want. They can actually go in and look at price and get price anchoring. So suddenly the consumer starts to see ways to access that hearing aid different than from the professional. And in fact, we see businesses that are setting up in the center here that are actually buying from the manufacturer and redistributing to the consumer and sending them into the professional, and that's where our managed care contracts are coming from. But at the end of the day, as a professional, as an audiologist, do I really care if somebody walked into my office with a hearing aid and they had it in their hand and I got to fit it and I got to make my gross margin? Do I really care what they paid for the hearing aid? Is that really the key factor? And my argument would be, as we move forward, we have to divorce ourselves from that product and start looking at what do we make, and again, we're into this unbundling discussion, right? What do we make or what do we provide in our services that as we go forward? So I think that when we start looking at those efficiencies, that gross margin becomes the number that we really want to start looking at. Whoops. Now let me give you an example of it. I'll do it with two hearing aids. One of the arguments out that I've seen in the affinity market and the managed care market is professionals are really reluctant to try to accept a patient when they're going to get a $500 fitting fee or a $750 fitting fee or a $1,000 fitting fee. There's the feeling like something's been taken from them, and they don't want to deal with that. But I think that if you're a business person, you really have to break it down to what's my return per clinical hour? What am I making? And so from a standpoint of, all right, I got to do a couple of things with you first. First of all, the median gross revenue of a average clinic in the United States is just north of $500,000. It's running right around 523. A couple different studies, Siemens and Phonak both, and they were really close together. All right, and so even if for purposes of getting us in the ballpark and making the math easy, I'm going to go to a $500,000 number. What we know is the average cost of goods is running about 35%. Everybody uses that as a benchmarking in most of their practices, and so on a $500,000 practice, you're going to see at 35%, you're going to have $175,000 in cost of goods, which means my gross margin, what I got paid for my services and dispensing everything, was $325,000. So how many clinical hours are there in a year? So for, again, purposes of math, we got 40 hours a week, and we're going to work 50 weeks out of the year. We're going to take a couple weeks off. So if I use that 2,000 and I divide it into this, I think the number comes right out to somewhere around $162.50 is what I generated per hour at the end of my day. Now this is median. Half the people are better, half the people are worse than that number. All right, let's take a hearing aid that somebody says to me, I want you to take well, I'll tell you what, even better. The average price of your hearing aid was like $21.68 in the mid-level, right? So let's just go to $2,200. And so if we did a 35% cost of goods on that, I think it comes to about $770. Okay. So if 770 is our number there, we have to do one other thing to even out what I'm going to show you here. 770 plus we had a marketing cost of 10% that we did in here. So we also have a $220 acquisition cost for this customer. All right, so that's $990. So at the end of the day, let's make it $1,000. Basically, we made roughly $1,200 to fit that product. I sold 2 of them, so my total was $2,400 that I'm going to get to take care of this particular product. All right. Now, how long am I going to take care of it? And the answer is most people are selling them in a 3-year warranty package bundle these days. So that means you're committed to taking care of this hearing aid for 3 years. And if you'll do the math and you look at the average customer, you're going to spend about 8 clinical hours to take care of that. Because your first year, you got an hour for the test, an hour for the fit, 30 minutes for the first follow-up, 30 minutes for the second follow-up. I'm at 3 hours. A 6-month check, 30 minutes for the 1 year, another half hour, maybe an hour, so maybe 4.5. And then every year, I'm going to see him for about another hour to an hour and a half. So, 4 plus, I'm going to go an hour and a half, 7, I'm giving it 8 hours to be generous. So 8 hours into 24, I made $300 per hour. Well, what if somebody sent me a mid-level product through a managed care? I'm going to get paid $750 on a product like that, so I'm going to make $1,500. But they're going to ask me to take care of it for 1 year. And in that first year, I'm going to spend about 5 hours with that customer, and 5 goes into that, $300. So was this a bad deal? 0 acquisition cost? I'm spending the same amount of time? No, it's not. And if we're business people really looking at our professional time, that was well worth it. Here's where the model breaks down, okay? After 1 year, I have to start charging for my services. This guy, over on this product, I'm getting $300 per hour for 3 years. Once I get beyond my first year, I'm probably not going to be able to charge $150 for a 30-minute checkup, and I'm probably not going to be able to get away with that. But do you think that that's right? See, so when we all take a look at the different models that are working, companies go in and they drive costs out of the system. And so when you look at the Costco's and how do they do it so low, they're driving costs out of these kinds of models. Part of it's their acquisition cost of the product, but a lot of it is the fact that looking at their service models and what they pay, the biggest thing is they do twice as much business as everybody else. They sell twice as many hearing aids. And I think that as we move forward in the marketplace, We have to find ways to take our high-waged people, and we know that our overhead runs at somewhere around labor costs 30%, and our audiologist is the most expensive one. Why would I have an audiologist doing a clean and check on somebody that I'm going to maybe make $35 on? If that audiologist is making $100,000, they're costing me roughly $50 an hour. I just lost money. That's not efficient. But in every day across the country, we put audiologists earning that kind of money doing a clean and check on something that doesn't generate that kind of revenue. And we have to figure out ways to drive costs out. That's what the dentist did. That's how they drove costs down, is using ancillary help. And I think we heard some conversation with the gentleman here before. So as we move forward, I think there's ways for us in the business world to look at how we drive these out. By the way, Costco, they don't have much of a marketing cost. They're driving costs out because they don't have a 220 per unit acquisition cost to get somebody through the door. We have to get better at how we market. We have to find ways to talk to the doctors. What Costco also has is people trust them. They have a brand that they trust. People know they can walk through there and that they're going to get a good price, and that if they don't like it, they can take it back. So where else do we have places where we can garner patients where they've gone someplace of trust? That if somebody says, you need to go do something, go do it. Well, guess where? Doctors. Guess what? Our health care plans. When we read a benefit in it, we assume somebody did some homework and said, this is a good place to go get audiology services. So I think as we move forward, our key measures are going to be gross margin. What do we generate in professional fees, and what can we do to bring in services and resources that are going to help us drive some of these costs out of the product, make it a little more competitive in the marketplace, so that we can have the same kind of benefits that we've seen in the dental industry. I think that we are much more like the dental industry than we are the optical industry. I think we need to start looking at that model very carefully from a business standpoint and bring it to the forefront. So I think now we're going to turn it over to Carl and answer questions. So thank you.